Now, Eddie's mom wasn't the only sneaky one in the family. When it came to sneakiness, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. Eddie decided to play a trick on his foster brother, Bill. Bill was a mischievous 12-year-old with a dimple and an infectious grin that could get him out of about anything. He also had a tobacco habit, but he didn't smoke. He either chewed Red Man or dipped snuff. One day, Eddie and Bill were heading back to the house from Racine. They were walking along the hot railroad tracks, Bill masterfully spitting tobacco juice 15 feet into the blackberry bushes along the right-of-way. Eddie, on a whim, asked for a chew. He knew the danger of swallowing the juice, so as he carefully tucked a small wad between his lip and gum, he made sure not to accidentally swallow any juice. Well, Bill admired Eddie for taking a chaw. Perhaps he could make something out of him yet. As they kept walking, Eddie began to get a bit cocky. "Hey, Bill," he said, "want to have a spit-swallowing contest?" Now, there was no way in the world that Eddie was going to really swallow the tobacco juice. He knew it would make him very sick. Instead, he planned to sneakily spit out his juice whenever Bill wasn't looking. Bill, on the other hand, had been chewing tobacco ever since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He could swallow spit all day long and not feel a thing. "Bring it on," he said with his famous grin. So they kept walking, stepping from one creosoted railroad tie to another, and not spitting. Except when Bill had his head turned. Bill cheerfully prattled on, pointing out birds and looking at the clouds in the sky. Eddie started to get quieter and quieter. He began to feel a bit green about the gills. He was certain he'd been careful not to swallow any tobacco juice. What was going on? As they climbed the hill to the house, it was all Eddie could do to keep his feet under him. Things began to spin, and his knees wobbled. When they got to the yard, Eddie pitched over on the grass in the shade of the old apple tree. Everything began to go dark. He felt like he was looking up from the bottom of a deep well. And then he passed out. When at last Eddie came to, Bill was looking down at him. He had that famous smile going, and the dimple flashed. His blue eyes twinkled, and he said, "Well, Eddie, I guess you lost." "I guess I did," moaned Eddie. He never tried tobacco again. Ricky, the boy's friend from Racine, probably wished he'd never tried tobacco. One day he decided to hike around the hillside to visit the boys. On the way out the door of his house, he grabbed a cigarette when his mother wasn't looking. He had a plan. A half-mile around the hillside, there was an abandoned coal mine. It wasn't a commercial mine, just what they used to call a house mine. It wasn't more than a 3-foot-high opening under a layer of sandstone where folks had dug coal for their fireplaces. Eddie and the boys had poked their heads in before, but after crawling in a few feet, it sort of petered out. Ricky had chosen this spot as the most secret and safe place he could imagine to smoke his cigarette. No one would see him here. So, after checking to see if anybody was coming, he scrambled up the bank, through the greenbrier vines, and ducked into the opening. Once inside, he pulled out the slightly crumpled cigarette and fished for a match. Kawoom! There was a flash and a roar, and the next thing Ricky knew, he was lying out on the road 10 feet away. He hadn't counted on mine gas, a byproduct of the coal, and a real hazard to miners in that area. When he struck the match, he'd ignited the gas. He had sailed like a cannonball out of the mouth of the mine. He picked himself up and felt around for broken bones. Everything seemed to be in order, though his face was stinging. When Ricky finally came panting up the hill to the farmhouse, he was met in the yard by the boys. They weren't sure they recognized him, so they got closer. "Ricky? Is that you?" "Sure is. Why?" "Well, your face is red as a beet, and you haven't got any eyebrows." "Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to explain," said Ricky, looking at the ground. You don't have to explain anything," said the boys. "We've seen this before, on our babysitter. You're in love, aren't you?"